H5, that percentage, and I get 8767, and that's correct for that one. And you may be tempted to kind of just copy this down. So let's just copy down 1. And you're going to get a weird answer. It's giving us basically 0, okay? What's going on here? Well, if you click up in the formula bar, it'll show you what it's pointing to. It's pointing to the correct percentage for cleaning fee, but it's no longer pointing to the correct revenue, okay? And so that's because I used a relative reference. So if I come back up here and I change this to an absolute reference, this will work. Now, by the way, there's a keyboard shortcut, so you could just simply type in the dollar signs. I would need a dollar sign before the B and before the 10, okay? I could type the dollar signs. There is a keyboard shortcut, and I'll be honest, I use the keyboard shortcut way more often than I type the dollar signs. On a Mac, there are actually 2 keyboard shortcuts. The primary keyboard shortcut is you hit the function key, the FN key, and then it's function 4, F4. So function plus F4. And that turns into absolute reference. And by the way, if you keep hitting function F4, notice now it's a mixed reference locking down the row. Hit F4 again. Now it's a mixed reference locking down the column, and then hit F4 again, and it's back to a relative reference. So you can cycle through the different versions of cell references using function F4. On a Mac, you can also use Command T. Command T does the same thing, and that's useful because for some reason, certain people on your Macs, when you hit function F4, it does something different. So if that happens, then the other keyboard shortcut is Command T, okay? And again, I think that's much more useful. Let me hit return, and now let's copy this down. And there, I've got a number, and if I click up here to turn on the rangefinder, now it's pointing to the correct cells, okay? And again, I could copy these down to these other cells, and just check this last one here, and again, it's pointing to that times that, that's correct, okay? So the key here is you need to use an absolute reference. Now, another version is, I could have used a mixed reference. So before I do this, think through, take a moment, think through, if I want to use a mixed reference instead of an absolute reference, which means I want to either lock down just the column or just the row. Which one would I use here to get the same results? So see if you can figure that out. Take a moment to think about that. So what I want to do is I want to lock it down so that it doesn't move up and down. I'm not copying the formula over. Now, at some point I might, but for right now, we're only using this column. I'm not moving it left to right. I'm only moving it up and down. So I need to lock down the row. I don't want the row to move. So I could do another mixed reference. Again, I'm going to use function F4, and I could just simply lock the row and not lock the column. And I'm going to get the exact same results. Copy that down, and I check this. It locked the row. I didn't need to lock the column. Okay. Now in this case, it doesn't matter. Absolute reference versus mixed reference doesn't matter. Where this could matter is, let's say, so I'm just going to make up some numbers. Okay, so I'm just going to put some numbers in here just to have some numbers equals the sum of these numbers here. Okay. What if I wanted to move this over so that it was taking this times that stuff? Well, again, if over here I have an absolute reference, so I'm going to lock that down to an absolute reference. Okay, and I copy this down, and then let's say I copied that over. Well, notice what just let's see. Well, first of all, let's see what happened. All of that percentage moved over. So I actually need to lock that percentage down. Let me actually change this function F4. I'm going to lock that down with an absolute reference. Let's copy this down, and now let's go. This is getting tricky. This is getting tricky because notice what happened here. I locked that down completely. I want it to move down. So what do I need to do here? I need a mixed reference. So for this one, I don't want it to move up and down, but I want to potentially let it move left and right. For this one, I actually don't want it to move left or right, but I do want it to move up and down. So for this one, I need a mixed reference where I'm locking down the column. So function F4, function F4. This one, I'm putting the dollar sign before the column. Okay, let's just test this. Okay. Notice when I come over here, I'm getting the same answers because I locked that one down absolutely. So instead, let's use our mixed reference here to lock the row, but not the column. Okay, so there I lock the row, not the column. I shift this down, I shift that over, and now let's just check one of these. Now that's pointing to the correct stuff. Okay, so that's where these cell references matter. Okay, that's where the cell references matter. So let's just walk through this again. When it comes to B10, if I'm copying this down, I want it to not move rows. I want it to stay in row 10. But if I want to copy it over to column C, I do want that to move over so that it moves references. So I want the column to move, but I don't want the row to move. So that's why I'm saying $$10. When I come up here, as I copy this down, I do want the cell to copy down. But as I copy this over to the right, I don't want that to move over to the right. So this is an example where I want to lock the column, but I don't want to lock the rows. I want the rows to move, which is why for H5, it's a dollar sign before the H. It locks the column so it doesn't move left to right. But the row is not locked so that it does move down. So if I come down here, it moves down. Okay. So again, just examples of how mixed referencing can come in handy if I want to create one formula and then just simply use the fill handle to copy it over. Otherwise, I'm sitting here and creating manual formulas for every single individual row one by one. Well, that's really inefficient. You want to ultimately create one formula here that I can copy down and I can copy over, and it's all done. Okay, that's the goal. Okay, that's the goal. Okay, so that's just a little bit more of the practice with absolute versus mixed cell referencing. Okay, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to clear this out. So clear these contents, and again, let me clear these contents. Okay, just to kind of get the cell the file back to what it was. Okay, so in the last part, I mentioned something about naming cell references or naming cells. Let me show you an example of this. Okay, so go ahead, select cells A10 and B10, so drag across those two, and then scroll down. And while you're holding down the command key, grab A27 and B27. Okay, so notice what I just did. I just selected cells that are not right next to each other. The way that you do that in Excel is you hold down the command key. Let's do the same thing here for A29 down to B30, holding down the command key. Okay, so select those ranges of cells. In the Formulas menu ribbon, click on the Create from Selection button. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to allow Excel to create names for some key cells that I may want to use in my calculations, in my formulas. And it's giving you options on where the names are going to come from. So in this case, I want the names to come from the left row. So I want to name each of these number cells based on whatever is in the left row. Now I could also do top row, bottom row, right column, but we're going to do left column. So click OK. Once you do that, kind of click out of there, come up to the names manager box, and notice I now have names up here. So for instance, if I click on profit margin, it just skipped down there. Or if I click on income before taxes, it skips right there. If I click on total revenue, it skips up there, okay? And notice if I actually click in one of these cells, like this is cell B27, it no longer calls that B27. It now calls that cell total expenses, based on that right there, okay? So the nice thing about creating named cells and named references is that you can use them in formulas. So for example, income before taxes is just gonna be the total revenue minus the total expenses, okay? Now I could say equals B10 minus B27, but here's a nice thing, I could also say this, equals total, start typing the name of the cell, and notice over here it gives you a preview, okay? And you could click on the one you want, so I want total revenue. Okay, minus, and then start typing total. And now I want expenses. And actually, if it's on the, so you can use your arrows, by the way. So you can use the arrows to select the thing that you want. And then you could hit the tab button, and the tab button will accept whatever it is that you're on. So in this case, total revenue minus total expenses, hit the return key, and that's that calculation right there. Okay, so why don't you try this? So in cell B30, I want to calculate the profit margin. The profit margin is going to be the income before taxes divided by the total revenue. So see if you can figure out, pause the video, see if you can quickly calculate that, and then unpause, come back, we'll walk through this together. Okay, so let's just do this. So I'm going to take equals the income before taxes, so I'm going to start typing that with an INC, and then I'm going to hit tab to accept that named range, divided by the total revenue, TOT, and I want revenue, I'm going to use the arrow sign down, and then hit tab. Okay, income before taxes divided by total revenue, hit return, and there you go, you should have 0.39. Okay, by the way, we could be formatting some things, but we did that last week. We could format that as a percentage. I'm not going to focus on that today just because we've got a lot to get through, but obviously that's a number that's kind of ugly. We want to turn that into like a format percentage if we were going to share this file with someone. Okay, but the point there is when I name cells or references, I can actually use words, which is really nice. And remember I said in the last part, a named cell or a named reference is an absolute reference. So notice, first of all, if I click here, it shows me that I'm using that cell and that cell. Okay, if I copy this over, and now I click in the formula bar, it's still referencing those two cells. These are absolute references. Those references will not move. Those references will not move. Okay, I'm gonna hit Command C just to delete that calculation. Okay. By the way, you can also manually. So we used create from selection to get that. Go back over to rental income. Notice here, like I've got this sum formula, which is summing up those things. If I didn't want to have to select those, I could actually name these. So go ahead, click select what is that? D5 down to D19. Select those. And actually, if you come over to the name box, you click in the name box. We could call this something. Just call this totals with an S. Totals. Okay. Hit enter. And now notice, if I'm selecting that, it now calls that totals, okay? And by the way, it's now in my name menu. I can click totals, and it selects that, okay? By the way, notice if I select one of these, it brings me to the other tab. That's the nice thing about this, okay? I'm gonna hit totals, okay? So now I could rewrite this sum. I could say equals sum, and then in parentheses, start typing in the word totals, okay? And I could arrow down and tab, and now it's sum totals, okay? So again, that's really nice. That's really nice. By the way, what if I made a mistake? So let's do the same thing for income. So I'm gonna select income, but let's not select the entire column. Let's make a mistake, okay? So select down to there, and type in the name box, not name box, income. And let's say incomes, just to differentiate from the other income names box, okay? Hit enter. And now if I come down here and I say equals sum of incomes, and hit tab, okay? Well, it's adding up, but notice it left out something. It left out a cell, okay? Which is not what I wanted. How can I fix this? If I come to the name manager, click on the name manager, this tells you all of the different cells and ranges that you've named, and it tells you the references. You know, what are the references? What is it referring to? So if I click on incomes, down here, I can change this, right? So I have it from E5 to E18. I actually want it to be to E19. Let's go ahead, update this to E19, okay? And now close, okay? And it's saying, hey, do you want to save the change? And we're gonna say yes, okay? And notice, by the way, it just updated my sum. It just recalculated the sum so that it includes that cell, okay? So the name manager is how you can change any of your names. By the way, the keyboard shortcut in Excel for the names manager, I believe it's Function Control F3. Function Control F3. So Control plus the Function F3 button will open up the name manager. That's your keyboard shortcut to get to the name manager. One last thing I'll show you, and I'll just kind of do it down here. So click on cell A23. Let's say that you wanted to have a list of all of the name cells and references in your workbook because you wanted someone that was sharing this to be able to know, hey, what are the cells that I can use in my formulas? What are the names that I can use? Okay. The way that you would do this is you would come up here using formula and paste names. It's going to give you a list of the names. You can select the ones, but if I want to paste the list, I'm going to click paste list, and it just creates a list of all of your named ranges along with what those things are referring to. Okay, so that's kind of a nice thing is you can paste the names to refer to later. Okay, let's go over to the rates tab. We've started looking at some functions, right? So I just used the sum function. Let's get a little bit deeper into functions. Okay, so on the rates tab, we want to calculate the median rent, the number of properties that are here, and the most common rent amount. Okay. So median rent. It turns out there is a function that's called median. Remember, a median is if you take all values, we're going to get the median of all of these. We're going to figure out what's the middle value. If I sorted these high to low or low to high, and I figured out what's right in the middle. That's what the median is. Okay. Well, the functions are all on the formulas tab. So notice there's a function library and a bunch of different categories here. Okay, a bunch of different categories here. Now, if I want median, that actually comes from a category called statistical functions. So if you click on the drop down for more functions and then go to statistical, I've got a bunch of different stuff here. And I'm going to scroll down until I get to, go ahead, click on median. It opens up what's called the formula builder. And the formula builder, it tells you a little bit about what the function does, and then it tells you the syntax. So the syntax is, what are the different arguments I need to use? What are the things I need to put in the parentheses? Okay, and so this one's saying for median, there's number 1, number 2, etc., etc. It's 1 to 255 numbers or names or arrays or references that contain numbers for which I want the median. So I'm just going to list all the things in the parentheses that I want to calculate the median for. Okay, and it actually is giving me a sort of a preview of what it thinks I want. Now I don't want D20, so I'm actually going to just type. I'm going to click over that. So I'm going to click over here from D5 to D19. Okay, notice it's going to preview what the result would be. Okay, it doesn't put it down here yet, but it's going to give you a preview of what the result's going to be. Okay, if I'm okay with this, I can click done, and there I go. It puts that there, and if I want to close the formula builder, I can click the X. Okay, notice up here it shows you what the function is. Okay, so the nice thing about using the formula builder is that it has different blanks for where you can put the different cells you want to include. Once you click done, it then shows you what the finished formula is. Now, if I want to ever use median again, I know that the way it works is it's going to equals median parentheses and then whatever the references to the cells are inside the parentheses. Okay, now go ahead. In this tab, I didn't hide columns, I hid some rows. So click on row 24 to 31, and then again, double click in between those, and it's going to unhide all of these rows. So I just want to go through what goes into a function. Well, remember, a function, just like a formula, it has to start with an equal sign. Okay, so a formula, it starts with an equal sign, and we can use a function inside of a formula. Okay, then you typically put the name of the function followed by parentheses. So for example, there is a function called the today function, which just gives you the date for today. And the way that would work is I'd say equals today parentheses. Okay. Most functions have arguments that go in the parentheses. Now the today function doesn't. The today function, you just put equals today. Okay, so for example, let's just do that down here. Equals today, parentheses, and hit enter. Okay, that's today's date. By the way, there's also equals now, parentheses. That gives you today's date and today's time. There's a function called pi equals pi, parentheses. That gives you the value of pi. So there are a bunch of functions you can use that have no arguments, but the majority of the functions we're going to use do have arguments in the parentheses. So typically you need to put arguments in the parentheses, so like the sum function, then you put the range of cells that you want to add up. Okay. For some functions, the order doesn't matter. So the sum function or the average function or the median function, the order doesn't matter. So for example, if I was just going to average B5 plus B6 plus B7, that's the same if I were going to average B7 and B6 and B5. So let me just kind of show you an example of this. I equals average of this cell, comma, this cell, comma, this cell. So D10, D11, D12. Okay, that's the average. Equals average. Now I could do D12, comma, D11, comma, D10. I'm going to get the exact same number. So with sum, with average, with median, with statistical functions like that where I'm just giving it a range of cells, the order of the arguments don't matter. When it comes to something like XLOOKUP, so we're going to talk about XLOOKUP in another part, it's a lookup function. Notice I have a bunch of arguments in the parentheses. The order does matter because they're different types of arguments. And so the function will work depending on the order in which I put things. So we'll get to that one in I think, the next part. But for right now, let's just continue with the functions where the order doesn't matter much, okay? So we looked at the median. The most common rent amount, that comes from, again, under more functions. Statistical, there's something called mode multiple, mode single. If you choose mode single, again, it brings you over here, it gives you a description, and again, you're just going to give it a range. I'm going to give it a range of these cells. So what the mode does is it says, what's the most common number in that list? Okay, again, I'm getting a preview. I hit done, and there I go. And again, that tells me what it looks like. So that, for instance, now that I know how that works, I actually don't even need the formula builder. I can just type it equals mode dot single. Okay, when I get the preview, I can once again hit tab if that's what I want, and then I know it just takes a range of cells. And then again, with functions, you don't have to type the final parentheses. You can just hit return, and it automatically puts the parentheses in for you. Okay, so mode single gives you the single most common. There's also mode multiple, so equals mode dot. I want mode multiple. I'm going to use the arrows to get down to mode mult. Hit tab. Works the same way as mode single. You give a list of or a range of cells, hit enter. Notice it's actually giving you two numbers. It turns out in this list of numbers, there are actually two numbers that show up twice. The number 245 shows up here and shows up there, and the number 350 shows up here and it shows up there. So mode multiple, notice it's kind of like filling over to the next cell. It will list, if there's a tie, it will list multiple. Multiple cells that are most common. When you use mode single, not single, it only gives you one, and if there's a tie, it's going to give you whatever one comes first. So 245 came first. Okay, and that's why it's showing up first. Okay, so we looked at median, we looked at mode single, mode multiple. Okay, by the way, I think I showed this to you back in chapter 1, but on the home menu ribbon under editing, there's this auto sum. So you've got a bunch of common functions. Okay, so I didn't mean hit min. Let me undo that. Okay, but you've got common statistical summary functions here. Okay, another thing I want to point out. So go ahead, select D5 down to D19. Notice down here in your bottom menu bar, it gives you a preview of some of the most common statistical summaries. It gives you the average, it gives you the count, it gives you the sum. Okay, so that I don't even have to, if I just want to know the number and I don't need it written down, I just want to know the numbers, I can just select the cells and kind of look down here. If you write